You choosing to stay late, to hang out, and to have a conversation. A really important part of my job is actually making sure that I'm hearing directly from Canadians. And over the past couple of years, with COVID, with various challenges, it hasn't been as easy to get out there as much. So over the past few weeks, I've been able to start getting out and meeting. I was with some carpenters last week. Glad to be here at Local 213 and IBEW. An opportunity for us to chat about what's on your mind. Obviously, if you ask me questions about what you're going through, that helps me understand the challenges that you're facing. But I also want to hear from you on your perspective on things outside your work, things that you may be worried about in our country, in our world. And I look forward to hearing a bit from you as well of some of the challenges you're facing and some of the things that you hope to see us work on and set forward as a country together for the coming years and decades. We're at a moment in our lives and in the times we're in around the world that is a really key pivot point, I think. And it's not just any one thing, it's a whole bunch of different things. The war in Ukraine has brought an end to 70 years of peace and stability that we had since World War II. That has caused a lot of things to be put into question around the world. The rise of certain authoritarian powers, China and Russia and others, is challenging some of the ways we used to think about how the world would trend towards democracy and successful liberal capitalist economies. The challenge of the pandemic made us question as well a lot of the things we used to take for granted about how connected we were, about how we lived our lives and how we keep ourselves safe and keep our loved ones safe. The challenges of climate change is changing fundamentally the way we operate as communities, as civilizations, as economies, because a lot of the things that we used to do without reflecting on consequences for the world or for future generations now carry a lot heavier weight to them. These are all really big challenges that are coming together at the same time. And that's leading to a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions about where we are, where we're going, how well we're positioned as individuals, as communities, as a country, to tackle those challenges and those changes. The pace of change is accelerating so much that staying on top and staying relevant in your professions, in your careers, to carry you through to retirement can seem like a real challenge. So all these things together are sources of massive anxiety. Leading onto that, the challenges around mass information, around social media and disinformation, around foreign interference, which is all over the news these days, the challenges of various a loss of an agreed upon fact basis. Democracies used to be characterized by people who more or less agreed on what was happening and disagreed on the best way to find solutions to the situations that was happening. We no longer even have a fully shared fact base when you look at all the different perspectives online and all the different experts out there. So there's a whole series of challenges we're facing as a world that can be really overwhelming. But at the same time, what I think Canadians have shown time and time again through tough times, particularly through the pandemic, where we pulled together in such extraordinary ways, we've shown with an openness to diversity and differences that have made us stronger and more resilient as communities, as societies. We've shown with a level of optimism that comes with no matter how hard winter is, we know spring's going to come. We know that we can make it through tough times by being there for each other and staying optimistic and working really hard, as Canadians always have. So we have advantages in our natural resources, in our geographic positioning, and especially in Canadians ourselves, that we can take great comfort in and can counter some of the anxiety we're all feeling. But these are all things that make it a particularly important time for societies and communities and politics to come together and have real conversations about where we're going and what the challenges are and how we're going to try and solve them. So for me, hearing directly from all of you, or as many of you as we can get to in the next hour and a bit, is a really important part of what I think matters most in my job, and I'm really pleased that so many of you chose to attend tonight. So with no more ado than that, let's get into questions, and I'll take the first question from here, and they'll just sort of go around the tables, around the room. So who has and you can ask questions about just about, you can ask questions about anything. There we go.
So inflation...
Sorry, what's your name?
James.
James, great to meet you.
So inflation is something that's really affecting young people. So what's your plan to deal with inflation?
Great question. I mean, inflation that we're facing right now has a number of different factors that have caused it. First of all, the disruption of COVID impacting on supply chains that meant that supply chains that were focused on maximum efficiency, just-in-time delivery was the big key word over the past decade or so, suddenly turned out to be a lot more vulnerable than we thought. And disruptions in supply chains meant it was harder to get products, and the products that were there got more expensive. The war in Europe, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine has caused energy prices to spike, particularly in Europe, because we're in a global energy market. Price of gas, price of fuel, price of inputs has gone up around the world. We also bounced back really strongly, stronger than many other countries, from the pandemic. We recovered full employment faster than just about any other country, any of our peer countries. Our economy was doing very, very well, which means you match that with disruption in supply chains and prices are going to go up. The challenge with inflation is the tools the government has to counter inflation are somewhat limited. If everyone's worried about the prices of everything going up, if we just mail a check for $1,000 to everyone, all the prices will instantly go up another $1,000. You can't just pump money in to try and, that creates terrible cycles. So we need to see inflation come down, and that's why the Bank of Canada has risen interest rates as a way of cooling the economy just a little bit. But that has real impacts on affordability, particularly for young people on rents, on mortgages, other costs going up. So what we're seeing right now is inflation is starting to come down. And we're hoping that interest rates have more or less plateaued where they are, and they're going to start eventually coming down again. So we do know that the fundamentals are strong and we're going to get there. But in the meantime, hearing the fundamentals are strong or inflation's way worse in Europe doesn't help you pay your rent or buy groceries. So we put forward a number of really targeted measures in the fall that were designed to help people as best we could without further contributing to inflation that would cause the Bank of Canada to keep raising interest rates even higher, which would be really bad. So we moved forward coincidentally on childcare reductions that cut childcare fees in half over the course of last year. It was something we'd done the year before, but it means thousands of dollars for families who have young kids in savings as childcare fees are down in half and on their way to $10 a day. We also moved forward with a GST rebate that puts a few $100s more into the pockets of 11 million Canadians who are particularly vulnerable, seniors, young people, some lower income folks. A top up to the Canada Housing Benefit worth about $500 that adds. We also decided to move forward on dental care for families that can't afford to send their kids to the dentist. And as this year, it's kids under 12. As of next year, it'll be kids under 18, seniors, and Canadians with disabilities. And a year or two after that, it'll be everyone who can't afford dental. And that's going to be another relief on people. These are all things that we're doing in a targeted way for right now when it's difficult. We're going to still look at ways to do things as they're difficult. We know housing crisis remains a challenge. We have projects. We've invested a lot of money in
creating housing and affordable housing across the country, working with municipalities, working with the provinces. The costs of housing, because of inflation, is going up, so we're putting more money to make sure that those projects go ahead. It's a careful balancing act we're trying to do, to be there in targeted ways to help people who need it now. But the biggest thing to help people through tough economic times is having a job. And the fact that employment is so high in Canada right now, it makes it a different kind of global economic slowdown. Usually in a recession, there's massive job losses. That's sort of the characteristic of a recession. It doesn't look like we're facing that kind of impact from the global slowdown in Canada. It's still going to be difficult, and that's why we're looking to do what we can to help. But at the same time, we should and can be reassured by the fact that Canada has a strong labor market, we have strong economic conditions, we have the lowest deficit of all the G7 countries, the best ratio of our debt as a size of our economy of all the G7 countries. We have natural resources. We have the kinds of critical minerals that are going to be necessary for the economy of the future. We have wind power and renewable energies. We're leading the way on a lot of climate change innovation, even as we're trying to decarbonize our traditional energy sources. Like, there are a lot of advantages that Canada has right now that a lot of other places don't have. Again, doesn't make you feel a lot better about having trouble paying your groceries, but we are on a track that is going to get significantly better. And in the meantime, we're just going to have to keep hanging on, leaning in for each other, having a government that's being there for you in ways that we can, and make sure we're building for a stronger future. But thank you very much for your question, James. You, sir. Actually.
Together or separately, or
I'll take notes and I'll try and cover them all. How's that?
Okay.
What's your first name, sir?
Well, first of all, it's Mervyn Van Steinberg. I've been a proud member of this union for about almost 45 years, and welcome to our union and our hall, and to see the work that this organization does. And in my 45 years, I've been on the planet long enough to remember the giant mine dispute in Yellowknife. Lasted 18 months, 9 people died. 213, this union, has a certification with Leadcore, and it went on for 18 months trying to get a first kind of agreement, and I'm not sure you have a first agreement yet with them. And both of these and many other disputes could have been, first of all, not happened the way that they happened. It could have been resolved if we had anti-scab legislation in this country. And I know there's an opportunity under this term of government, and I'm hearing that you and your government is committed to make sure we have anti-scab legislation, and I would hope that that happens before the term of this government, because it's a nasty, nasty thing not having anti-scab legislation. The other one's on a different topic. In 1991, Canada signed the UN Commission for the Right of Children. You endorsed in the 94 TRC recommendations in 2015. You did that yourself. One that called to action is number 6 that I want to talk specifically about. Peter Julian, the Burnaby MP here, has in front of the House right now a private member's bill C-273. It's to amend the Federal Labour Code, Section 43, to eliminate the spanking law. And I would hope that you could commit, and your government would commit, to support that. And finally, because this has been going on for, well, before this was a country, that this spanking law has existed, and I think it's time to eliminate that. So those are the 2 questions I'm most passionate about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mervyn. First of all, we're a government that partially got elected thanks to folks who were wanting a government that was a little more positive towards organized labor in this country. One of the first things we promised to do as I sat down with labor groups was to get rid of 377 and 525, the Harper-era anti-union legislation. That was one of the first things we did. But more than that, it wasn't just about doing the right thing or doing something to help people who had supported us. It's about making sure that unions are seen and organized labor is seen as an absolutely foundational partner in the success of this country. It has been, and we've seen it over decades, how important labor has been in creating good middle-class jobs that have created the heart of Canada in so many ways, and not even just building trades like here, the electrical workers, but the contributions you make both literally and figuratively with the jobs you do, but also the salaries you bring home to build communities, to build homes and families that are contributing to this country in concrete ways and keeping our economy going. It's the middle class that has always built the country in every possible way, and it is organized labor and unions who've been at the center of fighting for a stronger middle class for this country forever. So what we have moved forward with, what my friend Senator now, Hassan Youssef, always talked about, is the tripartite approach of understanding that an economy needs to be built on, yes, a government that is engaged in creating the parameters for it, active business community looking at creating growth and opportunities, but as an essential third part of an equal stool, labor unions to make sure that people are properly protected. So we have worked over the years on many different initiatives, including this UTIP program that has done so much for training. And I have made a commitment, and I'm going to hold that commitment, that we will be introducing anti-scab legislation before the end of this year. On Peter Julian's private members bill, we promised to take a look at it and to take it very seriously. The work we're able to do together as two progressive parties in the House right now to demonstrate at a time where there is so many challenges of populism and sort of right-wing rhetoric out there, being able to work together with another progressive party to do real things. I mean, dental care was something we did together. We're going to take a very, very good look at Peter's proposal around that, and we'll see what we can do. Indeed, indeed. Sticking up for the little guys, something you've always done. Thank you, Mervyn. All right, I'll keep going around. Take a question from back here, so I don't have my back to you the whole time. Okay, go ahead.
My name is Manny Randhawa, and let me open my phone. The first question I have is, can you explain the government's policies on energy and infrastructure investment and how it will impact IBEW members and the electrical industry as a whole? And then the second one, because part of the electrical industry does overlap in the federal jurisdiction, telecom workers, for those who don't know, what is the government doing to address the shortage of skilled trade workers in the electrical industry, and how can the IBEW help?
Great questions. First of all, on energy infrastructure, we've committed to a fully net zero grid by 2035. We need to be able to, and it's not just about protecting the environment or protecting the planet. We're increasingly seeing, as we're drawing in investors from around the world who want to build things in Canada, who want to enlarge their footprint, do research, do natural resources extraction and development and manufacturing, they're asking for clean sources of energy. It's something that their clients are asking for, something that customers around the world want. I was just in Dofasco a few months ago in Hamilton at the Dofasco steel plant. We'd worked out a deal with them where they promised they were going to shift their carbon-fired steelmaking processes from being carbon-fired to being electric arc powered by 2028. We sent them a fair wad of cash for them to do that, and they said, okay, we can do it by 2028. And I went down for a sod turning exercise a few months ago, and they said, actually, we're not going to do it by 2028. I'm like, okay. We're going to do it by 2026. I'm like, oh, well, that's great news. You suddenly care a lot about the environment, do you? And they're like, well, yeah, but that's not the reason. I said, I know. That's not really the reason you're doing it. Tell me why. It's because the market for steel has pretty much flattened around the world, but the market for green steel is shooting up. And they know that that is something, and of course, when you're firing things or smelting things with electric arc, it's a lot more precise than a coal-fired furnace and allows for a higher quality of product and everything. Well, the workers I was talking to there were saying, okay, I'm a third-generation Hamilton steelworker. Now I know there's going to be a seventh and an eighth generation Hamilton steelworker because we're ahead of the curve on where the world is going on this. And those are the kinds of things that matter. So when we can say already that Canada has got an 80% clean grid, which is way more than just about every other country in the world, that's a huge advantage. But we also know we're going to be drawing in investments chasing after the use of that green electricity to be able to be more successful. And our energy needs are going to be going up even as we try to decarbonize. So there is going to be a need for innovation and efficiencies and new technologies, whether it's carbon capture and storage applied to natural gas power plants so that we're not emitting carbon into the atmosphere, whether it's getting back into the business of nuclear in a serious way, which Canada is absolutely looking at and a lot of people are working hard on. Whether it's looking for more places we can do hydro, whether it's looking at microgeneration, a better use of solar or wind or offshore wind to convert to hydrogen. There are massive investments that we've been making already. When Germany was struggling with the fact that they have to get off of Russian oil and gas in the coming years, Chancellor Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, came over last August, went to Newfoundland. He absolutely wanted to see Stephenville, Newfoundland. And I knew Newfoundland pretty well, but Stephenville, I still had to scratch my, oh yeah, that's right, that's in the southwest corner. Because there's a potential there for offshore wind, converting to hydrogen, to ship over to Europe to meet their energy needs in a clean, responsible way that they're very excited about. So there are massive infrastructure investments coming in electricity, in clean energy, and we are going to need all the very best IBEW members we can to contribute that. It is a growing area where Canada is not only going to cover its own needs, but we're going to be able to show the solutions that the world needs as well for how we decarbonize, how we get more efficient, how we take advantage of this digital economy we're all in that runs on electricity, ideally clean electricity. Thank you for your question, Manny. Did you have a second one? Skilled trades study. How do we get more people into skilled trades? Well, a lot of it is things that you guys are doing right here. The way IBEW here in BC is leading on recruiting women into the trades, recruiting new Canadians into the trades, working with Indigenous partnerships as well, getting more and more people to see the good quality jobs that come from skilled trades, the personal satisfaction and challenge that comes with constantly doing, learning new skills, growing as the world evolves, being, valuable and valued by whatever community you're part of. This is a huge message that we've got to get out to young people who are uncertain about where the future is going, and know that if you can get a job that involves, having skills that you acquire along with your brains, your creativity, your problem-solving ability, and actually be able to contribute to literally and figuratively building the world around you, these are good things. All right, you had a question. Yeah, you faked it, but if you want.
Hi, so my name's Karen, and actually I'm interested in talking to you a little bit more about climate change, because we know that as we were talking about moving into a carbon-free future and a net zero future, that the skilled trades are going to be essential to that, not just for electrical work, but for HVAC, but also about how to make sure that nobody gets left behind in that transition, because there are a lot of workers in some skilled trades, including people like gas fitters, that might find that they don't have a place in that future. So how can we ensure that everybody is brought along in this transition to this just transition to this green future?
That is a hugely important question. And it's one that we've been working on really hard for a number of years now. Because despite some of the rhetoric out there, climate change is real. You have just to look at the floods and forest fires and impacts that we're facing right now to know that it is. And more than that, investors around the world are looking for decarbonized processes and areas they can invest where the money is going that takes into account the fact that we're fighting climate change. Having put a price on pollution in Canada, which actually is something BC led on before anyone else did, has shown that it's a way of spurring innovation and nudging the market in the right directions to make it the smart choice. And we're no longer seeing anyone really believe that there is a choice to be made between a strong economy and fighting climate change. We need to do that together. And I'll be honest, a lot of the brunt of the rhetoric on this has been aimed at people who've been working in the oil and gas industry with good jobs, building Alberta and contributing massively to the Canadian economy over the past decades. Canada has done very well as a country because of the oil and gas industry, because of, not only because of it, in large part because of it, because of the innovation and the hard work and the problem solving involved in making the oil sands viable as a source of electricity, a source of energy for us all. And that happened because Alberta workers built it, were innovative, figured out how to solve the technical problems with world-class researchers in Alberta, and contributed massively to our economy. The challenge of a net zero global economy by 2050 is a similar technical challenge. How are we going to meet not just today's energy needs, but the energy needs of a growing global economy and electric cars and everything that goes with it in 30 years, is something that is going to lead to tremendous innovation and tremendous jobs. A pipe fitter is going to be just as needed, whether it's for oil and gas or whether it's for hydrogen or other solutions as part of a nuclear power plant or whatever you. The kinds of skills that trades have, I mean, it's, as you have worked, even those of you who are starting off, you're already seeing every year new innovations, new thermostat boxes, new approaches to smart grids in homes that is totally changing the way you used to do things. But invariably it means more work, not less work. The challenge actually when you talk to people in the oil sector, in the energy sector in Alberta, is not, oh my gosh, how do we make sure that everyone has jobs? It's how do we make sure we have enough people to do the jobs? The oil sands boom wasn't so much an oil sands operation boom. It was an oil sands construction boom. It was building the oil sands infrastructure over the past few decades that really gave a tremendous boost to Alberta construction economy and the Alberta trades. Well, as we build lower carbon infrastructure, as we build new ways of generating electricity and drawing the energy we're going to need on, there are so many training centers like this, and we need a lot more of them right across the country, that are training up are so important. So I'm extremely optimistic about our ability to make sure we're creating more jobs. I just want to make sure we're actually able to fill those jobs. But that's very much a focus we're having. Thank you. Come over here. You, man.
Hi, Justin. My name's Christina. I work across the street, and I do our WorkSafe, long-term disability, short-term disability, and accommodation law. And I've noticed since the pandemic, there's been a destabilization of everything. Mental health claims have gone up 40%. I've checked the different insurance data. It's on the rise everywhere. Like no one's ever seen it this extreme. I know that there's some money earmarked for BC. Is any of it put towards mental health? I know the hospitals have closed, the psychiatric hospitals, but what, if anything, is the government going to do to help people struggling with mental health?
Thank you so much for the question, Christina. It is a huge issue. We're all and have all been touched by mental health in our families, in our communities, in our group of friends. I mean, the prevalence of mental health challenges in our society means nobody doesn't know someone who themselves is struggling if they're not struggling themselves. have watched my mom all her life get to a place where she is now talking and giving speeches and an activist for destigmatization of mental health. And the fact that actually, as I started doing town halls over the past few years, actually just before the pandemic, one of the things that amazed me is in almost any audience I'd went to, a young person would put up their hand and ask me about mental health in a way that others, I think generationally or whatever, there is now an openness to saying, yeah, I'm really struggling. I'm really needing help right now. Even before the pandemic hit, mental health was one of the largest reasons for loss in the economy. People taking days, taking time away. And the pandemic has only accelerated that and layered on in massive ways the anxiety, the anguish, and the challenges that people are facing. One of the challenges we also have is that our healthcare infrastructure was always built around institutional models where traditionally if you needed help, you'd go to a hospital, you'd get treated, and then you'd come out of the hospital and you'd get back to your life. Well, we now know that it is community care, it's home care, it's health care, it's self-care. It's all so many different ways of doing things. And that's something where what we had around mental health care, over the past many decades, almost built in an understanding and a reliance on the fact that the stigma meant that very few people would actually put up their hands and ask for help. And now it's a great thing that lots more people are putting up their hands and asking for help, but our system just cannot meet the needs. Our Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Carolyn Bennett, who was herself a family doctor before she got into politics, is really focused right now on the fact that we can't silo mental health anymore. It's not like, okay, if you have a problem with your kidney, you can go see a nephrologist and they'll take care of it. It's just if you're facing mental health challenges, it's not just one place or one thing you're going to need. We have to get a lot better at creating a resilient, holistic approach to mental health so that we are a lot more able to get support from it, whether it's a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a counselor, whether it's medication we need or talk therapy, whether it's just a safe environment, whether it's just a sort of coach. Like, there's so many different things that can happen. And one of the things that we should all be better at doing as well is being mental health first aid workers. I mean, how many of us know CPR? How many of us, did our Bronze Cross or whatever when we were kids? How many of us ever got trained in mental first aid? You're a facilitator. Perfect. Excellent. Well, we need more. We need more of that. We need people who can engage and see when someone's in crisis, and not just professionals and trainers. We need bank tellers and hair salon stylists and people who are taxi drivers or Uber drivers or whatever. Like, if the more people are or more trained and versant and conversant in dealing with mental health, the more resilient we become as a society. So all that to say, mental health is part of the huge priorities that we've put in the health accords that we've just signed with the provinces. BC in their budget yesterday just announced $1 billion towards more mental health care. There's a lot more to do, but it is one of the 3 priorities, along with the 4th priority of data, that we're building into the healthcare accords that we're signing right now. But there's an awful lot more to do, and I just salute you for the work that you're doing and ask you to keep doing it, and we'll get more and more people to do it because it's so important. Sorry, did you have a follow-up? No, okay. No, thanks. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Just got to open my phone here. So I've been with the telecom industry for about 25 years, and I get...
Sorry, what's your name?
Jason Little. Mergers and pricing and competition sort of is the sexy thing to talk about in the public. But what gets forgotten about this is the workers. And replacement worker legislation would help. It puts the strength back in those communities, as you alluded to, especially those workers that are keeping Canada connected. But really, the telecom industry is most guilty of is offshoring tens of thousands of jobs. And these are middle-class jobs which really created opportunities traditionally for women and new Canadians. And right now, at the end of this month, about 7,000 TELUS workers will be in a potential labor dispute with a company that continues to offshore jobs in the tens of thousands. I guess my question is, obviously anti-SCAP legislation probably would have helped us maybe change a bit of that narrative. But would there be a commitment from your government to potentially review the offshoring practices of industries like the telecommunication industry that really reap billions of profits off the backs of Canadians? Thank you.
Oh, thanks for your question. Now, Jason, no, actually, leave him the mic. The offshore, are those call center jobs mostly, or is it
call center jobs
as well?
At their IT jobs? These are even their scheduling departments that just booking schedules are going offshore, and this is all jobs that were done in communities up in the north and right across Canada. Sorry.
Yeah. No, there are advantages to a more globalized world that we see every day, but there are also big challenges around that. And one of them is access to cheaper virtual labor in a job where call centers can be anywhere, in a job where digital connectivity means location is less and less essential or key to where you're doing it. There is a big temptation to offshore jobs. What we need to do as a country is do a better job of figuring out what jobs we want to have in Canada and what jobs we can accept be offshore jobs. There are, and it's not an easy question, and there's no simple solutions to it. Community, I remember I was in Cape Breton visiting a town where there were massive numbers of call centers, and that was just the way it happened because that was where telcos set up. And when they started offshoring around the world, that town took a real big hit. We want to make sure there are good jobs in Canada. We want to make sure that the kinds of jobs that kids grow up and get to do and go to school. We're like the best educated country in the OECD. There are jobs that can be automated. There are jobs that AI is going to take over in the coming years. There are jobs that, are going to be under pressure to be offshored. We need to make sure we're keeping the value and the strength of our communities here and getting those good jobs for people. And I'm not saying that call center jobs are not great jobs, because for some people and for it fits with their workload. It fits with the challenges they want to do. They like to do that stuff. It can have fairly technical abilities around it. And we should be looking carefully at telcos and what the offshoring practice. I mean, there was some big scandals around banks doing too much offshoring a few years ago. But this is a conversation that we have to have as a society as well. Because the other conversation we have with people is, we're getting charged too much for our cell phones. Data is so expensive and our cell phone coverage is so expensive in Canada. And here telcos have found a way to, lower prices by using cheaper labor practices around the world. And where are our choices as a society? Do we want to have better jobs for people and pay slightly higher prices for it? Or do we want to drive prices down to the basement and accept some of those offshores? I think there's a balance that we have to strike, but we have to be really direct about the kinds of choices we make as a society on that. Nobody wants to pay more for their cell phone bills. They're already way too expensive as it is. And yet Canada is a big, sparsely populated country that requires massive amounts of infrastructure to keep everyone connected, and that has costs for telcos. And yet we don't want to pay too much for our cell phone bills, and yet they're under pressure to offshore. I guess the answer I'm giving here is not much of an answer at all. I'm just laying out the challenges we have. And it's something that governments have struggled with and will continue to struggle with. How do we get that balance right to make sure we're keeping enough of the right good jobs in Canada, so particularly small communities where they're not close to a city, they don't have the kinds of infrastructure that can draw in vast numbers of work, where a call center would make a huge difference, or a government employer would make a huge difference. And that's something we want to try and create. But we don't want to do it at the cost of making self-service inaccessible for everyone else. And finding the line on that, I think we can do a better job with. And I definitely hear you on that. But it's not a simple promise like, okay, yeah, we're going to bring all the jobs back and you're going to pay $1,000 a month. You know, nobody wants that. It wouldn't be that anyway. That's just an event. I'm not scaring it. I've got to watch what the headlines come out of these town halls. But, there's a balance, and that's the work that a mature conversation that we can have about, the trade-offs. We had a big question around this around our shipbuilding industry, right? Do we want to build ships in Canada, or are we going to buy ships from elsewhere? We made the decision as governments that no, we were going to start building ships in Canada again. I know it's the right decision, but it might have been slightly cheaper to buy ships off of South Korea or Norway or wherever else they're making a lot of ships. But we make choices as a society with the things we want to do and how we want to value it, and we assume those choices. Thanks, Jason. Okay, question. Yeah, you in the back. Yep, red shirt.
Hey there. Thanks for taking my question. My name's Cade. We're all concerned, I think, here about increases in cost of living. Mine's about cost of food increase, and I'm curious about mandating a 30% reduction in fertilizer on our farmers. How that's going to decrease their profits, perhaps decrease their yields. Is there maybe like training in other ways that they can make up for maybe lost production or something like that? And also, too, how is us, the consumer, going to be affected by that?
That's a great question. And I can reassure you that that's not the plan. We are not mandating 30% reductions in fertilizer use. We are encouraging people to be aware that the carbon emissions related to fertilizer use, the costs of fertilizer continue to go up. The more we can find other solutions and support agricultural workers in the work they do is bringing down our emissions. The agricultural workers, the farmers that I meet across the country are as passionate about protecting their land and feeding future generations and seeing their kids and their kids' kids succeed in their family farms for future generations, like as they inherited them. I was in a town hall just last week in Quebec where a fellow talked about the fact that it's just getting so hard for farmers right now. And he feels like, as he looks at his kids who he wants to take over the farm that he could trace back to his great-grandfather, that if it ends with him, it's on him. It's his failure. He absolutely doesn't want that. And he wants to be able to continue for generations to come. But we also know the world is changing, and we have to make sure we're supporting and working with our agricultural workers and farmers to be able to meet the challenges we're facing. So yes, we are looking at how we can make more efficient use of fertilizer, how we can increase yield, how we can make sure that Canadians are getting the best possible local produce in a country that has rougher winters than our nearest neighbor down south and not as much arable land. You can't, no matter how much global warming happens, you're not going to be able to grow tomatoes in tundra, right? The soil isn't there for that. So they're doing great things with shipping containers and greenhouses. But the technological innovations that we need to lean in on are going to require us to be stepping up and shifting some of the things we do. But the innovation I've seen on the farms I visited across the country, whether it's using GPS to target exactly the right amount of fertilizer or water in one particular field or another, the way that we're using various new technologies around monitoring animal health and things like that is extraordinarily promising. But there are going to require shifts and changes, but farmers themselves are going to lead it, and we are going to be there to support them, because unlike small business down the street, if we lose a farm, that's gone. We need to make sure we continue to support the people who, as we saw during the pandemic, are more important than ever on feeding and supporting Canadians. Supporting local production, local growth, local farmers is an essential part of what we're always going to do as a country. So I know there's a bit of misinformation out there around going after farmers around fertilizer. That's not what we're doing. There's some concerns what's happening over in Europe, in the Netherlands particularly. But we are very much focused on supporting farmers and giving them the tools to be successful, not just for the years to come, but for the decades to come and for the future generations. Thank you, Keith. Yes, you, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Lynn White. Thank you for taking my question. Our people believe that anything that happens takes 7 generations for things to sort out and work through. And, it's only been about a generation, if that the people before us, my close relatives, our close relatives, have been through the residential school. And our people are still being left behind. We're trying to climb out of the hole. I want to just hold my hands up for a minute to the students that are here. These are access students that we put in this electrical program with a partnership here, and it's been very successful. And so they're paving the way for those that are coming behind them, and I'm very proud of them for doing that. In the meantime, we're leaving a lot of people behind. Even our kids aren't graduating high school in a lot of cases. And so I want to know what your stand on that. Like, what are we doing to help move it ahead? Like, how can we make things better for this generation so that they can make it better for the next generation and it can move forward? And as a second question, what are your views? What do you see, not your government or not your policy, what do you see as reconciliation?
Great question. And I'm thinking to myself, I got to shorten my answer so I get to more people, but then I get a question like this, and it's an important one. First of all, when we first got elected in 2015, there was a wave of Canadians, non-Indigenous Canadians, demanding action on boil water advisories, on reaching parity in funding for schools, in saying that, Canadians spend a lot of time patting ourselves on the back for being a great country, but we ignore the history of the mistreatment and the attempts at assimilation and erasing Indigenous cultures for so many generations, for so many centuries. And I think it was a really, really positive thing that it was a real issue in the 2015 election to say, okay, no, we have to change our approach on this. And we took on that challenge that Canadians laid on us with a lot of enthusiasm, and we continue to have it. When we took office, one of the first things we saw was kids in reserve schools were funded to only about 2/3 the amount that kids in provincial schools were. So we fixed that. We fixed that quite rapidly. And we built hundreds of new schools across the country, and we're making an impact there. We lifted about 130 long-term boil water advisories, and the remaining 30 or so that are still there, most of them in Northern Ontario, all have a plan and a project manager and the funding to end those as well, because nobody in this country should not be able to drink the water from their land, particularly when it's people who've been on this land for millennia. Residential schools are not part of our past. They're part of our present. The trauma, the intergenerational trauma of residential schools, of having had an entire generation or more than one generation had their language taken from them, their culture taken from them, their identity tried to taken from them, and the ability to parent or be parented taken away from them by a deliberate and conscious decision by the Canadian governments over time, doesn't get fixed by just closing residential schools. The lingering impacts of residential schools are visible every day in the outcomes that are worse for Indigenous people than non-Indigenous Canadians. We are living, all of us, the impacts of residential schools, because at the same time as residential schools were teaching Indigenous kids that their language had no value, that their culture had no value, that their identity had no value, every other school in this country was teaching non-Indigenous kids that Indigenous languages had no value, that Indigenous culture had no value, that Indigenous identity had no value. So we are all impacted by the atrocious mistake that was residential schools, but none more impacted than people who went through residential schools and who were raised in families of survivors of residential schools. And that's why the work that we need to do of healing, of restitution, of building is so serious. And that's where programs like this one, that are giving opportunities to build success, including people in the success and letting them lead in that success. Reconciliation isn't something that Ottawa can do. No matter how well-minded or how smart we think we are, and this is what's actually needed, it won't work if it's a continuation of the colonial mindset of where we're coming from and who we are. The big work of reconciliation that we've done over the past years as a government has been, first of all, trying to rebuild trust. Why should any Indigenous person trust the government, a Canadian government, at all? So rebuilding trust by centering a lot of what we're doing around empowering Indigenous communities, Indigenous leadership, Indigenous members themselves to figure out their path and build forward in meaningful ways. Being there with resources, being there to accompany, being there to meet the priorities that people are putting forward themselves. That's how you do it. So you ask me what reconciliation looks like. A lot of it is non-Indigenous Canadians stepping out of the way and saying, how can we help? And what do you need? And being patient when we say, what do you need? And someone who's never been asked that in generations says, I'm really not sure because I've never been asked that question. And how can I be sure that if I tell you what I actually need, you're not going to turn around and ignore me and mock me for it and exclude me again in 6 months or a year or tomorrow? So there is a lot of work of healing and of trust building and of offering capacity building and accompanying and being allies and being patient, even while we're all impatient because every single day the tragedies accumulate. It's hard work, but it's the work that Canada needs to do. And we're doing it all together, not any one government, but all of us. Thank you, Lynn. Yes, sir.
Hi.
Yeah, it's on.
Hello? Hi, my name is Christopher Lawrence. I'm sorry, but I need to challenge you on everything you just said.
Excellent. I don't mean that facetiously. I mean, this is a
No,
good conversation.
fundamentally, you speak about reconciliation, yet the Indian Act is still in place. You speak of reconciliation, yet you still sent RCMP Goon Squad up to Wet'suwet'en territories. And anytime Indigenous have basically said, oh, hey, you can't necessarily be putting a pipeline through a territory without an inherent consent, you ignore it. So I need to ask, as Prime Minister, and if reconciliation truly is your thing, will you actually make the commitment to replace the Indian Act with UNDRIP? Will you actually make it so that you have fundamental consent for crossing territories?
Okay, excellent points. First of all, yes, let's replace the Indian Act. The Indian Act is a colonial piece of legislation that has no business in a modern society. It is an extension of colonial oppression on Indigenous people, and it should be gone. Absolutely. You can't replace it with UNDRIP. UNDRIP is a different thing, but the principles of UNDRIP should guide how we move forward. So yes, let me finish it, and I'll turn back to you, Christopher. So yes, we need to get rid of the Indian Act. Absolutely. There are a number of self-governing nations that have gotten out from under the Indian Act. We've worked with them, and they are now completely free from the Indian Act and are now under their own choices, their own direction, their own governance, have nothing to do with the Indian Act. And that's a very positive step. And it's a step that we want every community, every Indigenous band and nation across the country to be able to take. But we have to do it at their pace, not at ours. Any community that says, I want to get out from under it right away, we will work with them to do that so they can run their own systems, be their own self-government. Absolutely. We have done that. We will continue to do that. But I can't say I'm going to erase the Indian Act tomorrow and walk away from the obligations that we have under the Indian Act to support individuals. Go ahead.
If I may, treaty obligations supersede the Indian Act and supersede our Constitution. Treaties that have in existence, you could speak to the number of treaties all you want, honestly, but stretch from all across the continent. Upholding treaty supersedes the actual Indian Act itself. So even getting rid of the Indian Act, you still have obligations under treaty. You still have obligations under the actual deed to this land that the Crown claims under the Treaty of 1765 and the Two-Row Agreement.
I would encourage you to actually go to sit down with leaders at the AFN, the Assembly of First Nations, that still represents the Treaty Act, bands, to encourage them to get out from under the Indian Act, because we are there to get them to end the Indian Act for any of them who want to.
Even though the Indian band councils themselves are nothing but federal imposition under the Act itself.
Okay.
So the question is,
okay,
are you committed
to do you not recognize the AFN then?
As far as I'm concerned, you need to be talking to the people on the ground themselves.
Okay.
You do have communities across this country that do not trust the federal government in one iota or the other, that actually view the Indian band councils as nothing but a federal imposition. So the question is, are you actually willing to talk with those people?
Okay, so my question to you is, do you not recognize the Assembly of First Nations as a voice for Indigenous people, for First Nations?
I'll be clear, I'm just a white boy for Port Coquitlam. I'm not well versed into how Indigenous view the AFN themselves. It's all about actually talking to the people on the ground.
Okay.
Not necessarily going through hierarchical leaderships that you actually have imposed upon them via the Indian Act itself, but actually going to the communities themselves. Hell, I'll ask you this. Would you be willing to actually take the time during your busy schedule to take a walk through the downtown east side?
I have.
Would you do it? Really?
Yes, I have, and I used to live in Vancouver. I have friends who work down in the downtown east side. A doctor friend of mine worked down there. I know the downtown east side, not as well as many people who live here, but yes, I know the tragedies of the downtown east side, which is why we continue to invest in supports and working closely with the BC government on that. Now, your question around the Assembly of First Nations, they are the organization we're working with to try and get out from under the treaties as much as possible. You also ask a question of Wet'suwet'en bands, and I guess from your perspective, the hereditary leadership is the one we should be listening to more than the elected leadership. From what you said about what we do in bands.
More or less, you should actually be listening to potlatch systems more than Indian bands themselves. What can I say? When you actually analyze the potlatch system, you find more direct democracy than you could in the Canadian state.
Yes, because Canada is not a direct democracy. We're a representative democracy. And that's something, not everyone here wants to vote on every single law that comes forward in the House. You elect people to send them to the House of Commons to make decisions based on the values that they share with you. I'll let you finish it. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, it just seems like you just could be spinning around it all day long. So I'll just move on to my next question. Policies pertaining towards a Green New Deal implementation, are you actually going to be doing it within the next 5 years or so? Because the actual economic benefits towards a full-blown electrified economy are insurmountable in terms of job growth, economy growth, so on and so forth. Hell, a project that you could even look into is inductive highways stretching from Vancouver all the way out to St. John's. A means to actually have it so that municipal governments can actually, or provincial governments for that matter, can implement public transportation for free. Tax subsidized.
Okay. On the previous question, I don't think I'm spinning around, but you highlight some very real challenges around Indigenous governance. And the decision that I made a long time ago was it shouldn't be Ottawa deciding what form of Indigenous governments there is. And it is up to Indigenous communities themselves, through potlatch or other systems, to determine who leads them and what their direction is in as engaged and respectful a way as possible. And we will deal with and we will be interlocutors with whoever the community asks and puts forward to be their representative. But that is something that is part of the challenge. We're seeing it with the Métis organizations where for many years the government basically didn't engage with the Métis, and there was one organization that sort of spoke for them. Now that we are engaging with Métis communities right across the country, there's a bit of a splintering between different groups of Métis because they realize, well, each of them can have a direct relationship with the government, and there's no need for the overarching community leadership to the same degree, or one voice for the Métis, because we're trying to deal with everyone at the grassroots level as best as possible. So we are moving in that direction. And as to public transit, yes, more public transit is a good thing. And I look forward to seeing all sorts of great projects from provinces and municipalities on how they can move forward. As a government, we've invested massively in public transit and will continue to. Thank you, Christopher. You, sir.
Hi. I'm Leonard Moore from the Nisga'a Nation in the Nass Valley. And I have a question about, telecommunications and about the digital divide and our goal for digital equity. And I did some research in it, and I noticed that in Canada, there's 31% of digital communities that are meeting the target speeds of 50 megabytes down and 10 megabytes up. I myself come from a community that's hitting 25 megabytes download, and that is not really ideal for not just personal goals, but also educational. We're often left with relying on textbooks that are so out of date and not having that connection to see if we can get those up-to-date information. And another thing would be health. It would also affect health with that internet things building up exponentially at an exponential speed. Everything has to be connected to internet, and not having that reliable connection really impacts our healthcare system in the area in northern BC. And another part would be the cultural native language and our cultural revitalization would also be important with internet connectivity, being able to connect to everybody that gets to travel and learn from the outside world and be able to bring that knowledge back to our community. And another part, Highway 16 is another part of our community, and that highway is without cell service, and there's big chunks of it without it, and that also brings up more concerns about emergencies that occur on the highway, and that has happened in our part of the area. And I was just wondering if there's any plans to help upgrade these infrastructures, and that would open up so much jobs and also help bring more training to our community and just help us thrive and just keep up to date with the current events.
Thank you, Leonard. That's an absolutely something that we're focused on. Indeed, as I mentioned when I was talking to Jason earlier, that Canada is a very, very big country and sparsely populated. So sometimes infrastructure and getting companies to invest in the kind of infrastructure that'll connect a small community that's not going to have a lot of ratepayers is a bit of a challenge, and that's why the government significantly stepped up over the past few years. I think the stat is that we spent over the past 5 years 10 times as much money as the previous government did over 10 years on digital infrastructure, but there's a lot more to do. Our cities are well connected. Our rural areas, our remote areas much less. We have made significant investments, and we're continuing to, and the pandemic showed how important it is to plug in. Everything we're doing around healthcare modernization is anchored around data, and telehealth and digital health and remote health is going to be extraordinarily important as well. It's not just, as you say, a luxury or a nice to have. It's a fundamental essential for participating in the life that we want to leave, that we want to give our kids. So yeah, we are doing a lot more on that. We're actually working at low Earth orbit satellites that'll be able to have affordable internet for much more remote areas that aren't properly covered. Canada's having significant investments in that. I just saw a note on that recently across my desk as we continue to work on it. We're working with the telcos to make sure that they're expanding access. It's data is now fundamentally a utility, right? We have, water, electricity, and data, right? Water, power, and data. That's what people need for a home and a life, and that's what we're going to get to. Your comments on language are exactly right. We made investments recently in co-developing protection for Indigenous languages, but to articulate that, to make sure that actually happens, we need to make sure there's proper connectivity, and we're actually getting people together on that. So I absolutely agree, and we're working on it, and we have goals of full connectivity in the coming years. It's a challenge, particularly in some small areas, like in the Nisga'a region, which is beautiful but remote. But we're coming, and we're working closely with the provinces on it as well. I was in Quebec, I think a year or two ago, where they were announcing investments that were going to cover 100% of the province with decent speeds. I'll have to check in and see how they're doing now, but it was a real investment, and this is goals that we're working for. Thank you. You in the back, in blue, and then I'll come back to one of you guys.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Teresa Davidson, and I'm the administrator for the electrical entry-level trades training here in this center. These are a lot of my students hanging out here. And I have a really important question about women in the trades. You've talked earlier a couple of times about having more skilled people in the trades. And one of our mandates here is to have more women in the electrical trade, to which we are achieving that, and we are the highest in the country so far in the electrical trade. And to encourage women to enter the electrical trade, the government offered a higher incentive for our women students. And I just really want you to know that a lot of the women students that saw that joined, ended their career and joined or changed careers or didn't have a career were single moms with kids. And unbeknownst to us, and I'm looking over the news, and I find out that as of March 31st, you're ending that. And now I've got all of these students that entered a year, 2 years ago, saying, what happens now? I was banking on that money. I've got 2 kids, I've got 3 kids, and now there's no money for them anymore. That's my first question. And then relating to this, but for a personal question, Canada Pension Plan. In 2018, somebody challenged the Canada Pension Plan for spouses that passed away, that the benefit that went to the other spouse, if you didn't have kids and if you didn't have a disability, you got a very minimal amount of your husband's or wife's pension. In my case, and I'm particularly talking about me because I've experienced this, and somebody challenged the government in 2018 to look at that part, and they said, yes, that's very outdated, that you shouldn't be penalized because of that, and so in 2019 that changed. So looking further ahead, I've known others and my friends who are about getting ready to retire, and their husbands have died suddenly, and they're going to start to take their CPP, and when they take their CPP, they're going to lose their husband's CPP because the Canadian government only allows your individual max. So I'm challenging the government to review that because I think that that's wrong, that you discriminate again and take away their husbands who hasn't even collected their money because they've worked all their lives as well and have reached the maximum amount that you can get from the government. So please look into that, and what are we going to do about all of my women in the program that are losing their money?
No. Thank you, Teresa. I know how successful that program was in getting more women into the trades, particularly here. And it's something we're committed to. We are absolutely looking at how we're going to extend that program. I did look straight at Carla because that's in her file. We need to keep drawing women into the trades, and we will.
Particularly through COVID, that had lost their jobs, and we're trying to find, they may have been in the tourist industry or they may have been doing something else that said, holy crap, I can do this if I can get this money. And the other problem, even today, which doesn't allow anybody, is daycare for these women. Because we have so many women that want to come that don't have daycare and can't afford daycare.
No. We continue to have that goal of getting women into the trades and supporting them. We are looking at how to extend that program. It's very much on my radar and our radar, and we'll look at that. On childcare, we agree. If we want to be successful as a society, we need to make sure there's affordable childcare. Affordable, available, high-quality childcare. That's why a couple of years ago we signed deals with every province and territory where the federal government put forward $30-some billion to make sure that last year childcare fees on average were cut in half across the country. And we are on our way to $10 a day within the next couple of years. Some provinces have already gotten there. Others are going to get there soon. That is a huge piece of it, but part of that wasn't just our requirement, wasn't just $10 a day. It was a wage grid for early childhood educators to make sure that more people would go in and be valued and respected as educators and properly paid. and to create more spaces as well, because if you can't find a $10 a day case, you don't get space, you don't get to actually benefit from it. And part of it also is understanding, I was talking with a group of nursing students the other day, the need for people who have shift work. If you need after school, after hours, even overnight childcare, what are the options there for you as well? So these are things that we are working on. We haven't figured it all out yet, but the country is moving in the right direction that way, because childcare is not just a social program, it's an economic program, and it's essential for participation in the workforce. And I promise one last question from back here. I'm going to go with you. Okay, 2 questions, yes, but one person, 2 questions.
My first question was...
Sorry, what's your name?
My name's Hannah. I'm from Six Nations. My first question was regarding Indigenous languages in schools, if there's any goal to actually start teaching people Indigenous languages, given how disintegrated they've become. My second question was to touch on the downtown east side. Is there an action plan to actually start treating the health crisis there, especially given how it affects our communities disproportionately compared to other communities?
Absolutely. Thank you for those both questions, Hannah. First of all, on okay. Language. Sorry, I've done Six Nations instead of language. A few years ago, we sat down to co-develop Indigenous language protection legislation in this country. It was C91. We passed it. And what it does is actually invest and empower in Indigenous communities to be able to protect, preserve their languages that elders are speaking that young people aren't learning. I would very much like to get to a place where non-Indigenous people are learning Indigenous languages as well. I was a French teacher here in BC, and I know that there's a challenge around getting people to learn languages. But the core and the first and most important element is not to lose the languages in the culture and have Indigenous kids grow up speaking the language of their culture, of their land, of their elders, and know their identity. Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. No. Making sure that you are grounded in your language and that you see the value in your language. I mean, as a Quebecer, I've spent all my life fighting for French because it's not just about language, it's about identity. Language is about identity, and extending that and understanding that that is a key part of reconciliation as we move forward is absolutely essential. And that's why we made it a priority to support and protect Indigenous languages, and we will continue to work with communities and move forward on that. Another piece of that is making sure that kids who are in situations at risk don't get removed from their communities, from their languages, from their surroundings. We've been able to make some significant changes in a number of communities across the country where kids were no longer sent into the provincial system. They're actually cared for within their communities, so they keep their language, they keep their access to the elders, even if in their own household they're at risk. They find better places where the community keeps them. So these are all things that are designed to protect and support and make sure we're not perpetuating the mistakes of past generations that we continue to suffer through and that you continue to suffer through as we see as a community. Part of the articulation of that, where it's most heartbreaking, is in downtown East Side. And the addictions, which is, in so many cases, self-medication for intergenerational trauma that people simply can't deal with. It is a public health crisis, has too long been treated as a justice system crisis. We need to get it out of the justice system and into public health approaches, which is why what we've done around harm reduction and safe consumption, the project that we have, that working with BC to decriminalize possession of harder drugs now. There was a lot of shouting about that, and it's a very politically polarizing issue still. And you can see the Conservative leader doing videos about how bad that is, but grounding ourselves in facts and data and public treatment and evidence of a public health problem is the way to move forward on this. So we're going to continue to invest in supporting people as BC said we're ready to do this. We have the wraparound supports. We know it's going to be more pressures on our healthcare system, but we need to do this to get people out of jails, get people out of incarceration, get people out of the cycle they're stuck in and into medical treatments and the kind of support. But part of the best way to fight against addiction is not just dealing with the addiction, it's dealing with everything around it, whether it's the mental health, the trauma, whether it's the housing insecurity, whether it's the job insecurity or the inability to get work, whether it's the loss of family, of community, of language, of culture, of all those things together. And starting to look at those as a holistic responsibility that we have, because it is a today articulation of residential schools of 20 years ago, of 80 years ago, of the generations past that is being passed on in trauma that we all have to deal with. So yes, there are lots of things that we're working on, partnering with BC, with Vancouver, but also with communities across the country. I mean, the challenges around opioids are everywhere, and the challenges around the impacts of intergenerational trauma and addictions is prevalent, not just in Indigenous communities, but across the country as well, in people challenged. We're going to continue to be there on the basis of science and treatment and support, as opposed to criminalization. Thank you for your question, Hannah. Thank you very much. Thank you all for taking time tonight. Unfortunately, we're out of time tonight, but I really, really appreciate the opportunity to exchange with you all. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your